Hello and welcome to this new terrain breakdown in Gaia. Today we have this terrain which I called Haunted Pass. I wanted to make a quite spooky but not too much mountain valley, as you can see here. And let's start, of course, from the shape graph as always. First of all, I started out with a mountain node, which is a great node if you plan to make mountains, but pass and ranges as well. I left all the settings to default, the seed is random. I then connected a polar. Polar rotate your terrain based on a certain degrees that you can choose here. I choose 159 degrees. I then connected a blur because as you can see we had a lot of artifacts, so the blur helped with that. Power of 0.2, so very small amount with a lot of iterations. And I then connected a swirl node. The swirl will give it a fantasy look because I was aiming to recreate something similar to the Path of the Dead in Lord of the Rings. I choose 83 degrees, so slightly rotated but not too much. I then connected a zero border because as you can see here we have a lot of borders that I don't like, and the zero borders remove them. We have some slightly rock formations here, but they are fine. Of course you can also increase the margin and the fall off if you want. I chose blur to the maximum, which is a value of 10, because if you have a low amount of blur, you will notice the transition between the mountains and the rest of the terrain. I then connected a displace node. The purpose of a displace node is to add more details, like these rock formations, for example, some noise here and there, and also to change the shape of the terrain. I changed the strength and the scale. I also chose high quality so I don't get any artifacts, and 2 iterations. Then we have a shaper to simply smooth out the top of the terrain. I choose a relatively small amount, 20%. Then the terrain split into 2. Let's take a look at the top one first. The top one is the main shape. The aperture node is just to fix the edges from being too sharp. I choose the octagonal kernel as always, as well with 2 iterations and spread method, terraces, and another terrace node. Now the difference between the two is that the first terrace I set it to the maximum amount with 0 uniformity and soft fall off. Soft fall off is useful because it will smoothen out the transition between the base of the terrain and the terraces themselves, this part here. And then the second one I did the opposite, so still a relatively high amount of terraces, but with the default 60% of uniformity, soft fall off as well. And we have this kind of result here. Then I applied an erosion node with the slope 85 preset, which is very good to create these rocks that falls down from the top of the terrain and create this very old and worn look. So this is the main shape. Here we have the second shape, aperture, but instead of using the spread method to fix the top of the edges, I use the contract with 3 iterations, and we have this alien looking result, which is also nice for spooky terrains. I then applied a fold look dev node, default setting aside the folding value, which I bumped up, and we have this very rocky surface, another erosion, and I think I use the slope 85 here. So we have all these rocks falling down. Then I combined the two to get this result with a blend method, 30%. So we have a little bit of the first terrain, and we have this fantasy / dark fantasy looking mountains. Then I made the base because as you can see it's very flat. If you only want the mountains then it's okay, like the pass itself, but if you also want the base then you must create it. So I started out with a worse length node. Default settings aside, I chose small structures here, and the complexity is lower by default, so I choose 8, and we have this rocky surface. Then I choose a warp. I chose the warp because I wanted a surreal look, not too much. In fact, the size is only 26%, strength to default, everything to default. Then a shatter node to create all these fractures in the terrain as well as rocky detailing. Then a combine node, and as you can already see we have the terrain. I choose the add method 20%. Don't bump it too much because it will go over your terrain. At least you mask it. You can mask it using an height data node. I didn't do it because I don't think it's worth it in this case. But if you really want to make a clean work, then yeah, you should mask it and use the blend method. Then after that I connected an erosion, just a gentle erosion, I think gentle slope erosion, to blend everything together. I wanted to keep the details of the mountains, but I also needed to blend the base of the terrain with the base of my mountain, so I needed an erosion. Breaker node to add more depth to the scene, and here I only changed the river length to 100 and the depth I lowered it to 20%. Also mode to accurate, I recommend to always use the accurate mode because more precise. And finally a thermal erosion node to add some dirt, as you can see here, to cover some cracks so it is more realistic. We have small rocks falling down and some soil and dirt on our rocks. And this is the terrain. Okay, so let's jump to our texturing process. For the texturing nodes, we have the texture node data, default settings, the slope, default settings, flow node. Here I enable the secondary and tertiary flows. I needed both. Rock map, I unchecked the invert box, then connected the usual blur node 0.1 value, and also an invert in case I needed the inverted mask. Okay, so let's start. It's quite simple this time. So first set map, I simply chose something for my soil, so a brownish color. Second set map, still a dark brownish with some white areas on the slope. Mix them together so with the min method, so we have this result here. As you can see, the base of the terrain is all dirt and the slope of our mountains is white. We have some variations. For the third set map, I wanted some brightest areas, so I chose this set map here, which has some bluish color, white and green, some mix of them. Used a mixer node with the blend method of 50%. This is before, this is after, and then for this set map, I choose a quite crazy gradient, as you can see here, because while the last mixer was connected to the slope mask, you can see here, this mixer is connected to the rock map, the first rock map, and I wanted to simply brighten up and give some coloration to the rocks. As you can see, they are a blue color with very bright spots. For this I chose the divide method. You can also choose the SQRT or the screen, but usually the divide works fine if you also want the color. If you only want the brightness of a setup, you should choose maybe the SQRT. Then we have another mixer, which I use the same setup. It is connected to the inverted node of the rock map, and with the multiply method 20% to simply give some contrast to the terrain. For the next mixer, I created another set map, this time a green tone, and this is for the flowing, so the various cracks of the terrain. In fact, I used the tertiary flow, which are the smallest one. SQRT method, so we have a white coloration, usually, it depends on your setup. 15% because I didn't want to go overboard. And then the final mixer, same set map, so the green tone, however with the power method 40%, and we have this dark color going on, which give it a more dark fantasy look, connected to the secondary flows, which are the medium sized. And then finally, color correction. First of all, I enable the equalization to 2% to avoid any possible RGB artifacts. Contrast, I always bump up the contrast so the colors are more vivid. I lowered the saturation because I wanted a more realistic and grayish tone. The hue 2%, so we have some more red going on. The lightness to simply give more brightness to the terrain, and that's it. So this is the end of the breakdown. I hope you enjoyed it. If that's the case, leave a like to support the channel, subscribe to stay up to date with the latest content. If you have any question, comment below, and I'll see you in the next video.